Welcome to the Her Story Circle podcast, the podcast that brings you the extraordinary tales of everyday women who are changing the world. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and I'd like to acknowledge traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. I also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. Every week, we dive into the lives, challenges, and triumphs of women from all four corners of the globe. We're here to inspire, enlighten, and connect, sharing stories that uplift and empower. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and join us as we explore the incredible journeys of women shaping our future. This is Her Story, where every woman's voice matters. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Her Story TV and the Her Story podcast. This is Gertrude Mache here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am graced with the presence of yet another fascinating woman. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our tribe. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, how old you are, and share your story with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm Robin Dickinson. I'm 40 years old and I'm in Englewood, Colorado, USA. A lot of pretty bad things happen. You said you could edit it. One more time. Bad things happened when I was a kid. Bad things happened in my home that we didn't talk about, but my doctors knew about it and the nurses at the doctor's office knew about it. And I had a feeling they did. I had some fuzzy memories of it. And then I found court records in my basement and I saw my medical records and I saw photographs and I realized that the doctors had known all about it. And as far as I knew, and as far as my mom knew, they hadn't done anything. But I also realized that they had the opportunity to do something, that they knew about what was happening. Now, my mom had gotten married when she was 19 years old. And she wanted a better opportunity for me. So from the time I was very young, she kept telling me that I was going to go to college in a way that said that was really all we did. And I had no idea there was any other option. And I was very lucky that she did that because I just assumed I was going to go to college, whatever it was I was going to become. And when I was 6, I told my mom that I was going to be a nurse. I didn't tell her why. It was kind of a touchy topic, but I did tell her that I wanted to be a nurse and I didn't want to deal with pee or blood. And my mom said, well, how about you be a doctor and your nurse can take care of that for you. And it turned out that doctors also have to deal with pee and blood, so I didn't completely get out of it, but it had never occurred to me that I could be a doctor. We lived in a neighborhood where there weren't even any nurses, much less doctors. So wanting to be a nurse was reaching pretty high compared to my friends. But being a doctor never even occurred to me. I had no idea how to get there. The only doctor I'd met had been a doctor we saw once in a while, but we didn't have great health care. And to be one myself, it seemed out of my league. But if my mom said I could do it, then I could do it. And I decided then at the age of 6 that I was going to be a doctor. My mom started treating me like a future doctor, even though she wasn't quite sure what that meant. And I certainly wasn't either, except that I had to do really well in school. One time we were driving past a private university about 7 miles from my house. It was beautiful. It'd been there for over 100 years. There were buildings. There were people playing Frisbee on perfectly manicured lawns. It was basically the opposite of my neighborhood. And I told my mom I was going to go to college there. And she's told me that if I worked very hard and got enough scholarships, I could. Well, I completely forgot about that conversation until years later when I was graduating from high school. And my high school chemistry teacher found out that I was planning on going to community college. She knew I wanted to be a doctor. And she also knew that you don't get into medical school from community college. I had no idea. And she said, we need to take you to see some colleges. And I was like, but that's not an option for me. I don't have any money. I'm the oldest of 6 kids. My family can't help me. She said, you could go anywhere. You go to Stanford. But going to Stanford was as likely as like flying. It wasn't going to happen. And my family needed me. I was the oldest and there were still issues, not like there had been, but I was definitely needed at home. So I was planning on staying home, working like I had been, and helping out my family and going to college. But my chemistry teacher had other ideas. She took me to visit her alma mater, which turned out to be that same private university that I had not even considered again, because of course it wasn't an option for me. I was the kid who was working 2 jobs at 13 and was getting paid cash under the table from one of them because it wasn't actually legal to work yet. I wasn't going to a private university. She decided that I was. And she took me on a tour and to meet different people, helped me with my application, and helped me with a bunch of scholarships. Plus a bunch of other people helped me too. That is the thing. In my path, there were so many women along the way, teachers and neighbors and family members who encouraged me and believed in me and told me that I could do it and treated me like I was someone who was doing it. And then I did. I got into the university. I had a lot of different little scholarships. I worked really hard, especially during my breaks. I was working as many hours as I could just to try to pay for everything. But I was doing it. I was going to that university. And then 4 years later, I went to medical school. Now, medical school is an interesting place. Most students come from the top quintile income-wise. So the top 1/5 of income is where about 75% of medical students come from. So when you think about doctors and you think about medical care, they all came from families where they didn't understand where I came from. In fact, only 5% of medical students come from people in the lowest income quintile. So people didn't understand where I was coming from. They didn't understand that I didn't have good medical care, that at my interview, I didn't know to wear a suit coat. I didn't even know where to buy a suit coat. I didn't know where to buy good shoes. But I got in anyways, and I became a doctor. And I discovered that my belief that being a doctor would let me know exactly what was happening in people's homes and do something about it turned out to be true. Because people told me what was going on, and I was able to do something about it. And that was what I wanted to do my whole life. And it meant the world to me. But then a lot of other things happened to me. I had multiple strokes, which is a whole separate story. And that led me down a whole new path. But before that, I had 2 kids with special needs. So I found myself a mom, a stroke survivor, 2 kids with special needs, and struggling to figure out what to do with my life. The next step actually started as a fight with my husband. So my husband is very sweet, and he totally believes in me and does not see that things are kind of hard sometimes. And so we had this knockdown, drag out, not really knockdown. He would never touch me, but we had quite the fight, me holding my babies and him saying, you can open your own practice. And I was like, no, I can't. I don't know if you've noticed, I just had a baby. But he did notice, and he still thought I could open my own practice. And it turns out that opening a medical practice isn't that hard. So I started a practice in my neighborhood caring for patients who are uninsured or underinsured. In the United States, people don't have equal access to healthcare. I didn't have good healthcare when I was a kid. And my first year in medical school, I was diagnosed with low thyroid, terrible migraines, severe asthma, all sorts of conditions that, if treated sooner, would have helped me a lot in life. And I knew there were a lot of people in my community who had the same situation. They weren't getting diagnosed and treated. I lived 7 miles west of where I grew up, but in a very similar neighborhood, because it's what feels comfortable to me. And so my daughter goes to a school where 80% of the kids are in a more challenged financial situation. And those are my neighbors. Those are my friends. Those are people I see at potlucks. And here I had this gift. I had gotten to go to medical school, and I could do something about it. When I was setting up my practice, I remembered really clearly one of my friends, neighbors at a potluck, telling me that if she had to pay even a single dollar to see the doctor, she wouldn't go, because every dollar she could spare would go to her kids. And that really struck me, because I understood that. She didn't want to even spend $5 on herself because she had kids. And so when I set up my practice, it was a membership practice where every month people would spend a small amount of money to have full access to me. They could call me anytime, they could message me, they could have an appointment, whatever they needed, because I didn't want there to be any barriers. Because if someone needed me, they needed to be able to see me right then. A lot of people thought that the model was pretty crazy, but because everyone paid a small amount, together they supported me. They supported my family, my husband, my 2 kids, and me for 7 years. And to me, that means it succeeded for my family and as a business, but more importantly, it succeeded for my community because I treated hundreds of people who otherwise wouldn't have had access to medical care. My first few patients told their friends, who told their neighbors, who kept passing on the word. A lot of my patients came to me way sicker than doctors normally get to see just in a regular clinic because they weren't going to go to the hospital. And I took care of things I never would have seen in a normal first world practice because people hadn't had access to help. I also noticed a year after I opened my practice that there were patients I couldn't help even as I was because they couldn't afford even a little bit. And I still needed to support my family, so I needed to set some boundaries around free care. So I opened the first free clinic in my city. It's still running now, though I did have to step away from it to help my family out more. But it's now providing free care every week. During the pandemic, they were outside for a lot of that. And they care primarily for our most vulnerable, our neighbors who don't have homes, and our neighbors who have mental health problems or substance addiction. And it's so wonderful to know that that's happening now. Before I started the free clinic, I'd get a little bit anxious when I saw people who didn't have a place to sleep at night. But now I know a lot of them, and it makes me feel really secure when I walk around and I see so many people I know and they say, "Hey doc, how are you? I haven't seen you in a couple years," or whatever it is that they say to me. And it makes the whole world my community. At the beginning of the pandemic, I had to give up my practice urgently. Both my kids have autism. And one of the big things with autism is needing everything the same. They both had therapists who'd help them with a lot of things, so it wasn't just me helping them. My husband is a very caring husband and father, but he also has autism. And so he struggles with some of the care tasks that parents need to do. And also, he also needs a lot of sameness. So suddenly having the entire world shut down was really traumatic for them. My son in particular basically stopped functioning. He just sat and screamed for hours, and it was heartbreaking. And it made it really hard to work from home, too. So I ended up, try again. So I ended up selling my practice to a friend of a friend who happened to be looking for a practice like mine. She'd been in a terrible car accident and had been out of practice for a while and wanted to come back and do something for her community in a smaller setting where she could really make a difference. So it worked out perfectly for both of us. She bought my practice, and I got to stay home with my kids. But then I was stuck with a problem. I needed to do something because I'm the only income for my family, and I also just obviously love doing stuff. And so I ended up just in desperation. Try again. My sister had become an elementary school teacher, and she suggested to me that I could teach online. Now, I was terrified of kids. I mean, I had kids as patients, but they were 1 or 2 or maybe a family at a time. And I spent lots of time with them. Every appointment was an hour, so I was used to spending a lot of time with each individual person. But kids in a group was not something I had a lot of experience with. And it also made me pretty uncomfortable to try teaching online, which I hadn't really done before. But out of sheer desperation, I started teaching pre-med classes for kids online. It's the only thing I really know, and so that was really all I could do. And it turned out there was a huge need. Serious pre-med classes for 3rd through 8th graders are not something you find all over the place. And it turns out that I love working with kids. It's actually way more fun than being a doctor. But don't tell my previous patients might watch this and find out. But I love teaching. And actually, when my previous patients find out I'm teaching now, they're not at all surprised because that's my favorite part of being a doctor. And I've done a lot of teaching with them too. So now I teach kids pre-med. Not just like, yay, it's our heart, it beats, but in detail. We go into all the most complicated parts of the human body. What do we use the oxygen for? Oh, in the mitochondria, to make energy for our cells, because cell energy is different than the energy that our body eats. And we just dig and dig and dig until it makes sense. And in doing this, I discovered that there were a lot of kids who were just hungry for this serious information about medicine. But I also realized that my life classes weren't actually reaching the kids that I really wanted to be able to reach. I wanted to be able to reach me, little Robin, who could never have afforded online classes that I had to pay for every single time. But I had a mom who really wanted to give me opportunities and who would have really tried to get me something if it was within our reach. And so that's why I started recording my lessons and putting them together into an online program. And so now I have my own medical school for kids. And because I priced it to be accessible for all kids from any background, it means that kids like me can go ahead and learn how to be a doctor when they're 6 years old, or whatever age it is that they decide that it's something that they might want to do. Maybe because of something bad happening in their family, or maybe because someone was sick, or they saw someone in their community get help, or a book or a movie, or whatever it was that inspired them. Teachers can recommend it to their students, and teachers can email me and request free access for any of their students who need it. And so now I'm finally being able to do something that I wanted to do for so many years. And that's be able to change those statistics in medical school. Because it is wrong that in a country like ours, I guess I should say ours because it's worldwide. No, because it's wrong that in the United States, which is so wealthy, they can't afford to get kids from all backgrounds the education they need to be able to go to medical school and the mentoring they need to be able to go to medical school. So that's why I do what I do, is to help my whole community and the world.
Robin, your story is truly inspiring. Wow. You know, a lot of times out of adversity, magical things can happen. It's amazing what you've done with your personal life experience. It's almost as if you had to go through that to be who you are, the woman you are today. Now, if there was somebody who's listening to this interview right now, who's had a similar traumatic childhood experience, I work with a lot of women who have been molested as children, who've been raped, and finding that space in yourself to change the story and change the narrative. What 3 nuggets of wisdom could you give? Because a lot of people do get stuck. How did you get to this point? Give us 3 nuggets of wisdom.
I think first of all is remember the fairy tales. Fairy tales are not just made up stories for children. They're a great pattern for our lives, because in the beginning of fairy tales, there is a lot of adversity. The heroine always has to go through a lot of bad things first to prove that she's good and noble and true and worthy, and to practice her skills and develop her character until at the end, she gets to be in charge and she gets to make a difference and make decisions that help herself and help the community. I believed all along that I was in a fairy tale. I have no idea why, but I loved fairy tales, and I figured this was the bad part. And if I could just get through to the other side of it, I'd get to the good part. And then I got another bad part and another bad part, which I was not expecting. But over time, I started to see a pattern, which is each of those bad things, even though it was horrible to go through, and I would never, ever want someone else to go through something like it, I wouldn't want to not go through it myself. Sometimes people ask about my strokes, which have left me somewhat disabled and happened when I was only 30 years old with 2 young children. And I wouldn't want to not have my strokes. I mean, I wouldn't want to have my strokes, but they gave me a whole different perspective and made me who I am, which is honestly a much happier person who's able to do a lot more good in the world and really live to my fullest in a way that I couldn't have done before my strokes. So that's the first. You're living in a fairy tale, and you're the heroine of that fairy tale. And if things are bad, you need to get through that bad part because you're going to get to the good part. I think the second thing is to be thinking about it as your story. There's a lot of story to my life. I always imagined that each section of my life was kind of one book in a series. I loved the Anne of Green Gables books when I was a kid. My favorite was Anne of Windy Poplars, but I read the whole series many times. And I would imagine that each stage in my life where things were hard for a particular reason or a particular set of situations, that was a particular book. And I would get through that book. We would get to the conclusion. I would close it and I would put it on my shelf. Residency was rough, but residency was just one book in my life. I put it on the shelf and it's done. The first few years after my strokes were pretty awful, but that was just a book. I put it on the shelf, and that's done. They're still a part of me. They're still a part of the series. And I can go all the way back to the book of my childhood and see what happened. But it's just a book. It's part of the story. And I'm still writing the future books. And, the Anne books keep getting better and better until her life gets very full and interesting. She has children and friends and family, and it's very stable. And she has all the things she wished for back when she was an orphan. You can also have those books that are going to be your future, that are full of people who you love and who love you. I think the third piece of advice I would give is to go to what you believe. We all have some core beliefs that we just cannot let go of. And sometimes it shows up in the ways that we get angry when they are not working the way we want. I cannot tell you how many times I have yelled, "God, why did you do this to me? I hate you." Which means that I probably believe in God, because I wouldn't be so mad at someone if I didn't think he was right there, not doing what I said I wanted right then. And hanging on to what you really believe in and knowing that that's true, even as you go through different things, and that that's going to make sense eventually, whatever it is that is you're going through, or might never make sense because the world is a broken place, but that you are not completely on your own. You're not just one small human. You're part of something bigger.
Wow. Now, if there was a parent who has a child who's starting to exhibit a desire to be a doctor, or a parent who's not sure what their kid will eventually do, what advice would you give in identifying that potential doctor in these little children and giving them access to you?
Oh, for sure. So, you don't have to be good at something yourself to be able to help your child. My mom is not good at math and is not good at science, and did not, couldn't help me in the way that maybe she may have wanted to, but she did what she could. And that was all I needed, is she saw that spark in me and she believed in me and then kept helping me along the way in whatever way she could, which for me was things like living at home during college. And she would give me gifts that were biographies of different doctors. And whenever possible, if there was a science opportunity that she could afford, she would get me there, because each of those little experiences added up. They weren't the same as all the opportunities that the rich kids got, but they gave me plenty of opportunities to get where I needed to go. And I know as a mom, it can be very overwhelming to have a child who wants to do something that I don't know anything about, which is my situation with both my kids. And I'm still lacking a lot of background. Even though I'm a doctor now, I missed out on a lot that a lot of my peers now had when they were young. And so I feel like I'm having to learn new things as a parent to help my own children that I kind of missed out when I was a kid. And that's okay, because we can all learn. The internet is a wonderful resource, and you can just Google or use any search engine and say, my child wants to be a fill in the blank. Certainly my program is something I want accessible to every kid. And so if your kid or a child's, my program is something I certainly want accessible to every child. And so if there's a teacher or a parent whose child can't afford to have access, all they have to do is ask, and I put them in for free. And also just to spread the word to other children and other families. A lot of kids are like me. They would have never thought they could be a professional or an artist or something that's beyond their day-to-day lives. And just putting that spark into them and believing in them can take kids so far.
Fantastic. Last question. Why is giving so important for the future of humanity, do you think?
Wow, that's a really big question. Every single one of us is blessed to be here on Earth, and we have our own experiences and our own lives, but we kind of own that piece, that existence that we can then gift on to the next people and the people around us. And if we each hold on to that, then it's just gone. It's wasted. It's used up. It's like holding a little match here myself. It's just going to burn out. But if I share it with someone else and they share it with someone else, then that keeps going. It doesn't matter what's happening to my match. It can burn out, but lots of other matches will have been lit. So I think it's so critical for each of us to give what we have, because together we can make the world a better place.
I love that. Yeah, I read a quote that said it takes very little effort for a candle to light other candles. You are so right. It turns into a bonfire and magical things can happen. Robin, it's been such a pleasure connecting with you today, speaking with you. You are truly an inspiration. If anybody out there has a child who's giving that potential to be a doctor, go onto Robin's website. I have it running at the bottom of the screen. And come back again tomorrow when I interview yet another amazing guest. In the meantime, Robin, thank you, thank you, thank you. Have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world. And bye for now. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning into the Her Story Circle podcast. I hope today's story has inspired you to believe in the power of our stories and the difference you can make in the world when you use your voice. I'm Gertrude Mache, and it's been an honor to share this space with you, where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a rich tapestry of diverse perspectives. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us share these stories with more listeners. Follow us on social media by looking for the Her Story Circle podcast for more updates. And join us tomorrow for another episode filled with courage, resilience, and empowerment. Remember, your story matters, and together we're building a stronger, more inclusive world. Until next time, keep making her story.